Right. Good morning to my friends around the world. I'm just launching here. I'll be right with you. Okay. This morning, I'm going to be continuing with my reading of the essay by Dr. Stephen Aizenstat entitled The Quest for One's Own Red Book in the Digital Age. And this is the book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arzt. And this is volume 3. This is the last essay in volume 3. And this is going to be quite an interesting discussion. And let's see. We had just a moment. I need to get one more thing onto my screen that I'm going to share with you, because the first thing I want to mention to you is that this week we had the Black Books being published, and let's see, I have my picture of them here, which I sent out with the notice for this session, and now it's going away from me, so I have to figure out where I put it. All right, no hope. Okay, so a couple of things were published this week, and one of them is the Black Books. And so let me share this with you. I'm going to turn off my virtual background for a few moments and give that to you. All right, I need to allow people into my group. So this is what was published this week. And this is not light, as you can see, nor is it small. This is the Black Books, which are the base material for the Red Books. And here's sort of a cover description of it. And I'm going to, I'll show you the other side of it. And so what I'm going to do is give you a quick tour of what I found in the Black Books. It's quite a impressive thing on my bookshelf. I will say that for it. And this is not light reading in any sense of the word. But just to give you a sense of it, here is volume 1 of the Black Books. And in this segment, Dr. Shamdasani has put a general introduction, and he has repeated a few of the images from the Red Book, as you can see them going by here. And they aren't quite as big and as impressive as they are in the Red Book, but they are present. And then the guts of this is Dr. Jung's Black Books. And so if you look at this, you'll see that there's a dark set of pages, about 2/3, and a white set of pages. Now, what this is actual photocopies or digital copies of Dr. Jung's actual Black Books. and they're all written in German, of course, and so one would need to be fairly conversant in German, but he has quite legible handwriting, so you'd be able to read it. And then in the back, the white pages are the translation. And so, for example, book 2 is November 12th to December 29th. So in this, Dr. Shamdasani has literally translated every word in the black books, and he's provided copious notes, footnotes, so that you can learn more things. And so, for example, I'm going to share this page so that you can see. Over here, this is all a footnote. So it's most of that particular page. Not all of them are like that, but this is an interesting page. And so, again, I opened right to it. So I guess I should read this particular footnote. And these pages have the date here, and what they are is the first number is the day of the month. The second number in Roman numerals is the month of the year, and then following it is the year. And in this case, it's 1913. And this footnote appears exactly right next to the date. And so I'm going to read this footnote for you, just so you have a sense of it. And good morning, Aline. Thank you for joining me today. It's rather lonely sometimes, especially in the early going, it being 8 in the morning. But on the other side of the world, where I'm aiming this broadcast, it is in an evening on Sunday evening. So here's what the footnote says. Monday, the following are the minutes of Jung's December 19th, 1913 talk on the psychology of the unconscious to the Zurich Psychoanalytic Society. Now, keep in mind, this is notes, so it's not actually just played out. Good morning, Annette. Good morning, Mistel. So here's what the notes say. For the primitives, there exists an intimate relationship with reality, which leads to a big specification of perception, which expresses itself in language through the absence of universal concepts. This intensive connection with reality appears to us as concretism. For example, the man who has killed a rabbit is expressed through he, one, animated, arrow, etc., shot, rabbit. Hence, instead of the concept man, a specific image, there is not a simple plural, but, for example, in Guinea, dualis, trialis, quadralis. The original numerical value is obviously not arithmetic, but mystical. It is a character or quality. This way, an immense complication of language emerges. There must always be, for example, for animals, the following information: position in space, distance, direction. For example, table needs the addition of not animated, upright, wooden. For example, I eat bread equals I am breading or something similar depending on the type of food. This concretism hinders the emergence of abstract concepts. for a long time. Shock is in Negro language, coronary artery in the stomach, tears, anger. The human's aching stomach, time, walking sun, milk, the hunter goes not eat, scorpion, man watches and cries, tarantula, bites man, he goes home and tells. Here we can already see the interference of the subjective observer in the objective. It sounds like charades, like the game of charades, right? In the further development, this leads to the primitive's ability to add qualities to things against all the experience and to give random meanings to symbols. For example, the corn is a stag. Equally, the stag is a feather or clouds. Cotton, etc., are feathers. The inner psychological value has the same meaning as objective in reality. For example, each disease, according to a primitive language, is an unfulfilled desire of the soul. Only through participation mystique, something becomes effective. For example, venom does not kill in itself, but only the venom that is bewitched. A psychological system is forced upon the things. For the Chinese, the death statue of the husband is still able to impregnate. Hence, the enormous importance of dreams, and there is no difference between dream and experience. The origin in the subjective prevails over the object. There are causal effects. Everything can be understood as a consequence of thinking, which falls together with the deed. If one would only act, nothing would be done. That is why the ceremonies have to be done in a correct way. Thus, they are full of hallucination. The inner world imposes itself the same way as the external world. Hence, effects on nature through words. For example, not the sun shines and lets grow, but our Father thinks. Finding analogies is therefore a highly important activity. It is sufficient to tell the myth, and the effect told by the myth will take place. The myth was originally a healing formula, which the power of the mind, magic of analogies, to reach sublimation. It follows that the primitive mind knows two mental activities: concrete rendering of reality, 1. 2, psychic interior world imposes itself on reality. The aim is to put the spiritual over concrete things, to let oneself be killed for faith, i.e., to emphasize the importance of the spirit. Okay, so I've been reading from a footnote from volume 2 of the Black Books, and since we've been joined by a few more people, I'll just show this once more. The front of the Black Books is photocopies of Dr. Jung's actual Black Books in German, and they show all his cross-outs and smudges and everything. And in the back of each volume is the translation. Now, one other thing which I'll point out here and pull it out, but this, once again, this is the set that was just published on the 13th, and I had pre-ordered it, so I got it on the day of publication. As you can see, it's quite the thing, and one thing to note is that there are six books that are the same size, and then the 7th book is taller than the rest. And I'm not sure I understand why the 7th book is taller. I haven't had time to really analyze this as yet. But here's the 7th book. And again, like all of them, it's dark and light pages. And so one thing that I want to point out in it is this sketch, which appears in the Black Books. And this is the sketch of the so-called Liverpool Dream. So if you know anything about Jungian psychology, you'll know that that was a numinous dream, which taught Jung about what the center of the psyche is. And then here in the black, again in this book, you can see this is about psychological types. And so he's put a small idea in there. And then later on, he obviously amplifies that in the Red Book. Now, here's the good news for people who are new to Jungian thought. Don't worry about the Black Books at all. We haven't had them until this week. Most of us have not. Sonu Shamdasani's been working on them for 10 years, or actually for 25 years, because they're the basis for the Red Book. So if you haven't read the Red Book, then don't bother with the Black Books, because you won't understand it and you won't appreciate its significance. But for someone like me who's been studying Jungian psychology for 33 or 34 years, it's going to be a long read, and one that is going to be very meaningful to me, probably for the rest of my life. I don't expect I'll be able to read it all within 10 years, but we'll see. If I keep broadcasting, I probably won't get through it all, but if I stop, then I might do it. Okay, there's one other book that's just come out, and this is related to the Tarot. And so I wanted to share it with you because I acquired it this week. And this is called the Library of Esoterica. And this draws from many different decks of the Tarot. And one of the participants in my Monday night class, in which we're going through the Tarot as a roadmap for life, has two of the cards that he developed in it. And so it was quite exciting for him to tell us about that. And so, for example, here you can see an image from the Thoth deck and so on. And so this looks like another book that's going to be fun to read for a long time, and I'll be using it more thoroughly in the Monday night class, which is 8 p.m. every Monday night, 8 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And so anyway, thank you all on YouTube for joining me today. And thank you for my audience on Zoom as well. The Zoom audience has covered their video feed so that I see some nice picture, but I don't see the individual, and you don't either on YouTube, which is part of the point. But I see there's 15 of you watching live stream on YouTube, so I'm going to keep going, and I will pay attention to the YouTube chat. So for today, we're in part 3. We're going to do part 3 today of Stephen Eisenstat's essay, The Quest for One's Own Red Book in the Digital Age. And this is from Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. volume 3, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arzt. And this is a very interesting section, and it's going to take you places you're not expecting, especially if you're new to this website. Okay, so it's in a subtitle called The Digs, Journeying and Deep Imagination. Now, mind you, this is intended as a basic class in Jungian psychology, and so it's really intended for people who don't have English as a first language. I'm trying to explain every sentence or paragraph as I go along and show the context. So here's what Dr. Aizenstat says. Underground, down under, in the worlds below the world, I have come to observe that the numinous, for the most part, has been banished from above ground viewing, not destroyed, but forgotten, not lost, but abandoned. Only as an adult have I come to fully remember and see with new eyes the psychic radiance that sparks all creation. Over recent years, and particularly after my reading of the Red Book, I have made my way back to the home place of the illuminated imagination. Now, what he's talking about here is when he says underground or down under, he's actually talking about the unconscious. And he's talking about numinous events. Now, these days, I think of numinous events as things in my memory that are very bright and I can see very clearly. And it's devilishly difficult to get the to get these things caught on camera or on a picture or a video. And so what I'm going to do is share with you some of the times that it happened to me. And so the first of these, I'll explain the situation. I live in Annapolis, Maryland, which is, I live 2 miles from the U.S. Naval Academy. And the U.S. Naval Academy has a beautiful chapel. And sometimes when I find myself down or in a depression, I go over to the chapel and just sit quietly in an attitude of prayer. And over the last 10 years, I've been fighting single-handedly a lawsuit against American banks. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm a lawyer MBA. I realized long ago, back before 2010, that the banks at the time of the crash of 2008 had arranged to get themselves paid double on all defaulted mortgages. And they did that by getting George W. Bush to just throw about $450 billion to the wealthiest Americans and to these banks. And but they didn't give this money to the average citizen. And so all these debts and all the risk that the banks had by these outstanding mortgages was paid for, okay, by the federal government, very much like what's going on right now with the coronavirus. The Congress is just throwing money at the richest 1% of the American people, and they're not sharing it very much with the rest of us. So we've already had, I guess, about $2 trillion go out recently. And most of that went to banks and very wealthy individuals in the form of tax cuts and that sort of thing. But most of us didn't see very much of that. Maybe we will if there's another bailout package. But again, the banks will get the lion's share of it. But I realized that, and what the banks did was then there was actually no debt because the debt was paid off to the banks so that the government could maintain the illusion that that the economy was safe and so that the economy could be built up. But most of us were out in the cold and the economy had collapsed, and people who had mortgages, including me, were unable to pay their bills. And so even though I had some savings, over the next 2 years or so, I paid out all of my savings to keep my mortgage current. And finally, in 2010, I ran out of money about in May of 2010. And so it took the bank about 18 months, but then they started to sue me in foreclosure. But I realized that they had already paid, and there's one rule that they were already paid. And there's one rule in the law, which is if you've been paid, then you have no damages, so that you can't get damages in a lawsuit. Anyway, they just ignored that, and the courts just ignored it. And that's one of the problems we have with elected judges in this country. But they proceeded to sue in foreclosure. And I fought very vigorously. As an attorney, I could handle my own case. And I probably put about $2 million worth of legal time into my case, which I fought courageously for 9 years. And I took it to the Maryland Court of Appeals 5 times. I took it to the US Supreme Court once. And I was always just bunged off. They refused to even listen to it. I never was allowed to present my case to a trier of fact, which means a jury. And because they never allowed me to present my evidence, none of the courts allowed me to present my evidence, eventually they just wore me out. And so finally in January of 2019, the local trial court simply gave me an order that said I couldn't file any more motions. And I could have appealed that, but I could have appealed once more and gone a 6th round. But anyway, I decided not to proceed. And so they finally did take my home. And obviously that was a traumatic experience for me, and all these cases that I had taken to the Court of Appeals were very traumatic for me. And so that's all background to this idea of numinosity, because on one of these occasions, back in September of 2016, I was very, very trashed out because I had lost in the Court of Appeals. And so I went over to the Naval Academy. I was very depressed. I went over to the Naval Academy and I was just sitting there. And all of a sudden, I felt this light come on me. Now, you have to appreciate that the Naval Academy Chapel is big enough to seat 2,000 people. And this particular morning, it was about 10:30 in the morning, there were no lights on in the chapel, only natural light coming in through the stained glass windows. And all of a sudden, there was this light on me. And I said, "What is that?" And I looked up and light was just shining on me only. Now, mind you, I had picked this place to sit at random, but only in the place I was sitting was there light. and I looked up at it. So I looked up at it and I said, wow. And oh, by the way, when the light came on me, my attitude changed instantly. And I went from being totally traumatized by what had gone on in the courts, because I realized that there's no rule of law for homeowners in the United States. That's what I had realized by this case. And so, and I can literally say anything I want about the trial courts and appellate courts of the state of Maryland, because they would never, ever do anything about it, because they never want these facts to get spread abroad. Okay, so anyway, I was very depressed, but suddenly this light came on me, and it changed my attitude instantly, miraculously. And so this is the numinous occasion. And I know you're not going to believe me, so therefore I actually said, wow, nobody's ever going to believe me on this, so I better take a picture of it. So I did. And so this is the picture I took. And so I was sitting on the right arm of the Naval Academy, sitting facing the left side of the Naval Academy, which is the east side. And I looked up at this light and I said, oh my God, no one is ever going to believe this if they see it. And as I said, I changed my attitude instantly. And as you can see, the interior of the Naval Academy Chapel, it was very dark. And the reason I sit in that position, the pew that I sit in when I go there, is because it looks up at this particular stained glass window. And this stained glass window is priceless. It's a stained glass window that was done by Tiffany. So if you ever hear about Tiffany glass and Tiffany stained glass, you'll see the difference, because the three little windows down below the balcony, you can see the balcony a little bit here. And this whole balcony actually holds the Naval Academy Chapel on a service day. But underneath the balcony are these other three windows, and you can see the distinctive difference in quality between the Tiffany windows and the ones beneath the balcony. But anyway, that was what happened to me, what I saw. And because I've seen scenes like this in movies, for example, where God speaks to somebody, St. Joan or somebody like that, it just completely changed my attitude in a very numinous experience. And so then I turned the camera around. I decided I better take a selfie. And so here's the selfie I took. Oops, that's not the one. Here's the one. Okay, so I took this selfie, and once again, you can see how bright the sun was on my face at that moment, and again, how dark it was in the chapel. Now, some of my friends have seen this picture, and they see this part of this stained glass window, and they say, what is that behind you? Is that a gargoyle or something? And actually, that's a beautiful stained glass window with the seal of the United States Naval Academy. But because it was so dark on that morning, it was a cloudy day for the most part. And so you can see this stained glass window is still not very brightly lit. And this one is definitely not backlit. But if you were to go on a tour after COVID of the U.S. Naval Academy Chapel, you'd be permitted to see this stained glass window, and it's usually nothing like that. It's usually quite bright and beautiful. I don't have that picture right handy here, but my point is that this occurred in a period of 5 seconds or 10 seconds when I said to myself, oh my God, I have to take a picture of this. Nobody's ever going to believe me. And then I turned the camera back on myself and took this picture back on myself. And it really does demonstrate the numinosity of that moment. And so, as many of you know, and I'll put it in the description of this video, I later in October of last year, so about almost a year ago now, on the 27th of October of last year, I gave a talk at the local Unity Church in Annapolis, and I gave an entire talk about numinous events that have occurred to me. And in that talk, I talked about many different numinous events that have occurred to me. Now, numinous events are, as Dr. Aizenstat is talking about here, they're special moments that you cannot even imagine how wonderful that they are. And as I said, that particular moment just changed my attitude about how I would be going forward. And so instead of fighting City Hall, which was a fool's errand, because as I said, there is no rule of law for homeowners. But I learned to accept that. Now, why did I accept that? Well, because in order for this to be legislated to work properly, would be a big political difficulty. And so if I look at the shadow side of it and look at what I would do if I were a politician, I have to admit that just leaving well enough alone and patching it up is probably the best approach. So you have one guy out of several thousand homeowners who in the state of Maryland lost their homes or were foreclosed. You have one guy out of that group who's smart enough, a lawyer and an MBA, smart enough to figure out what happened really and who can fight you. And so you just shut him up, which is what happened. Then you get to keep the system going as before. And when we started this lawsuit back in the very early time, we were told by one of the bank's attorneys, nobody ever fights us on this. And so that's the way the system works. It's not the way it's written in the law, but that's the way it works. And so nobody fights them. And so the result of the case was I had about, I'd say $500,000 in equity in my home, which I stood to lose, but my wife and I stayed in our home. And because I fought them and was able to do it myself and didn't have to pay a lawyer, we got to stay in our house for 9 years. And the result of that was that that basically we got our $500,000 back in not having to pay our mortgage for that 9-year period. So we had free rent in effect for that 9-year period. But not everybody can do that because it was some of the most difficult legal work I had ever seen, and I did it all myself, every single thing. And I filed over 4,000 papers with the court and 4,000 pages of documents. And so the court knew well enough that I had a case, but they absolutely could not let it see the light of day. So they couldn't allow it to be tried by a jury, because if it was, it would be front page news. And so looking at it from both sides, from the shadow side and from my side, from the shadow side, I understand that the judges had to do what they had to do in order to protect the banking system. Because, by the way, that's a fraud that's going on in every county courthouse in the country. And so it really possibly could cause another collapse, actually. And so from the court's point of view, as judges, they have to weigh, should we give this guy a jury so that he can make this case or not? And from my point of view, I was at least having my home, place to live for a long time, and it was a lovely location. So anyway, that's what numinosity is about. And so anyway, I gave this talk a year ago, and in that I used this example, but several others, to talk about numinous events. It's called Finding the Living God. And the living God is in one's heart, okay? And so that particular event opened my heart and allowed me to see it from both sides now, from the evil side as well as the good side. And so I acknowledge that there are both sides to the story. And Martin says, hey, Skip, so the numinosity altered your state. Did you feel rewarded in your personal path, and it gave closure, and perhaps it was not for your battle or reward? Yes, certainly I felt a certain closure at that time. And I did continue fighting for about 2.5 more years, because I had another argument that I could make, and which I did make. I think that particular day was probably the end of my 4th trip to the Court of Appeals of Maryland, and so I had lost that appeal, and so I still had one more argument I could make in motions. So I made that argument, and it took another 2.5 years to work all the way through, making the argument at the trial court, and that was denied. And then I had to make the argument at the middle level court, and that was denied. And I was never allowed to have a hearing whatsoever at the appellate level. And then I took it to the Court of Appeals again, a 5th time. And so it's all documented, it's all on the record. But the courts have sealed the record because they can't allow it to see the light of day. If an investigative reporter got a hold of it, they would have a field day. But I'll just say that if there's any investigative reporter or movie maker that would like to tell this story, I've actually sort of written the draft of a screenplay for this. And one day I was actually particularly moved, and then one day I wrote the outline of a comic opera complete with the judges as the Greek chorus in the comic opera. And so I have all that. If anybody wants to play with it, they're welcome to. And you don't need me necessarily. All you have to do is make motions under Freedom of Information with the courts of Maryland and see if you can look at my papers. It would make one hell of a story, or other stories. But anyway, that's my story. And I sometimes tell it knowing that nobody can deny what happened to me. Okay, but other numinous events. For example, if you think in your memory, the events of your life, which are bright and lighted in your memory, those were numinous events for you. And so, just take 15 seconds and say, okay, what are the first things in my life that I remember? Just take 15 seconds, take out your headset or your earphones, and just jot down the first 5 things you remember. And probably those things are lighted up in your unconscious, and you'll immediately grok what I'm talking about. And I often use the term grok. Grok is sort of super understanding. And so the example is, it's actually from Adlerian psychology. If you tell a child the stove is hot, they might believe you. They might have a belief that mom and dad are trying to protect me, and I'm going to believe, I have belief in what they tell me, that I can't touch that stove. But it's only when you actually touch the stove and you feel it yourself in your entire being, then you know what hot is. So when your parents tell you it's hot, it's like every religious service that you go to. What are theologians? They're people that want to intermediate between you and God. And of course, God is in your unconscious. And so they actually want to intermediate between your conscious mind and your unconscious mind. And so they do all their rituals and all those things, and they have dogma. And what dogma does is it puts a roadblock so that you just follow this course rather than actually experiencing your unconscious and experiencing God, which actually directs your life. And so for a child, a child can believe mom and dad when they say the stove is hot, but only when they touch it. Now they know what hot is. And so that's what grok means. That's having the experience at depth. And so there's a novel written by Robert Heinlein in 1961, I believe, called Stranger in a Strange Land. And it's about a young man who's born on Mars. And so he's actually a human Martian, but he has never experienced being in actual life on the Earth. And so in that novel, Robert Heinlein defines grok. And if you look it up, you can actually put into Wikipedia Robert Heinlein or Stranger in a Strange Land, or you can put in it grok, which is the term grok, into Wikipedia. Say Wikipedia grok, and you'll get it. And you'll get a very long description of what grok means. But basically, it means the experience, having the experience. And basically what Dr. Jung was talking about throughout his career, which is that you can't understand anything from a psychological point of view until you've actually experienced it. Then you can understand something. And so that's what we're talking about, because and what's wrong with other forms of psychology? Well, if they're based on statistics where they say, okay, this person came into my office, I see that they're depressed, so I'm going to give them whatever drug they give them. And that'll make 90% chance, statistics and logos, logic, 90% chance it'll help them. And that's the way most psychology is practiced in the United States. And the result of that is that we now have, well, I haven't looked at the statistics recently, but a couple of years back, we lost 72,000 people to drug overdoses. And I think that many of them got into drugs because they thought they would be helped psychologically. Jordan Peterson is certainly the poster boy for this, because he cavalierly thought that he could take a narcotic to solve a depression problem that he had, and it almost killed him. He survived it, but this is why we have to be very careful about the idea of saving the logos. We have to have experience, and that experience comes from the eros. I think Dr. Peterson has had that eros experience now, unfortunately, and maybe he groks it in terms of what's wrong with psychology that's based on statistics. But Dr. Jung's psychology was based on experience, and it's why Dr. Jung's work is becoming more attention-getting in the 21st century, because the statistical approach to psychology has had many, many, many terrible consequences. Not to say that Jungian psychology doesn't also, but in the sense that it tells you what's true about religion. And but it wasn't Dr. Jung that created that situation. It was the scientific method over 500 years that took religious myth and said, well, that's not true, and that's not true, and that's not true, to the point which we got to at the end of the 19th century, when Nietzsche just simply announced God is dead. God, in that metaphorical sense of, let's say, the Christian religion, was dead, because it no longer, God no longer connected to our lives, and because you would go to church on a Sunday and maybe you would feel better, as I experienced myself, but you couldn't logically explain why, so you just pushed it down in the unconscious and didn't worry about it. And so there's, tens of millions, especially of men, but also women, who know that scientifically there's no God up there, not as described by Christianity, and there's no devil down below, at least not as described by Christianity. But both of those things are in your heart, and so Nietzsche declared an observation that God was dead in the logical and the logos sense. But Jung came along in the next generation and prove that not only is God alive, but where he lives and how he goes about doing the work of the Godhead. And so that is a new religion in a sense. He's accused of starting a new religion, which he didn't do, but his was the religion of the individual, which is that one first must understand yourself. And so when I gave my example of the experience in the Naval Academy Chapel, it's not because I thought that Geppetto was up in the sky moving things around so that the sun would shine on my miserable body at that moment. That was a random event. But because it was such a dramatic event, it opened up something in my heart and made me say, oh, okay, now I get it. But I've had other experiences. For example, when I was 5 years old, my mother, who was 25 at the time, this was in October of 1952, she was driving 3 young children. I was the eldest at age 5. She was driving us across the northern United States, across what's called the Badlands. And so if you think about how rural northern South Dakota and Montana, Idaho, and western Washington are today, think about what it was like 68 years ago. It was quite a rural part of the country, and she had taken on the task of driving her 3 young children. The youngest was my sister at age 9 months, driving us from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to Seattle, where we could catch shipping to take us to Kodiak, where my father was assigned in the U.S. Navy at that time. And so as I think about that trip in retrospect, it was quite a courageous undertaking that my mother did by herself. But during that trip, she was teaching me how to read a map. And I've known how to read a map from that time. And I just remember being in the front seat with her one time. And I looked up at her, and somehow there was a light on her face. And I just knew in the depth of my being that I was in the car with a goddess. And so if I think about the numinous events in my own life, I mean, I didn't conceptualize what a goddess was at that moment. But now in retrospect and upon reflection, I know what a goddess is, and I recognize that my mother was that. And probably we all react to our mothers that way, but that's what a numinous thing is. And so let me go back through and look at your comments. Just trying to find out where all this. So Martin says, I'm not going to go back and look at everything, but Martin says, hey, Skip, so the numinosity altered your state. Did you feel rewarded on your personal path? Okay, that was the one I just answered. And so, yes, Mistel, that is reflecting a duality. And as I said, in that moment, I changed my attitude entirely. Um, and Patrick says, I'm planning something similar. Skip is always in the same stream. I seem to reside and always sinks. Well, that's nice to hear. Love my stories. Okay. And and Mistel says, entertaining yourself. Yeah, I suppose so. Why not? It helps me. It helps me to help you. And now it's quite common an experience for me to have people approach me and tell me how much this YouTube channel helps them. And I very much appreciate those emails when I get them because it makes my work here meaningful uh, and more important to me. And indeed, the I have a long experience with the East, with Asia, and so the reason I do this live stream at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning is because I want my friends in Asia to be able to um, hear these teachings, as well as people in the United States and Europe. Um, so uh, there's a comment overlap with Gnosticism. Very honestly, I don't know anything about Gnosticism really, other than that Gnosticism was into the experiential also, um, and into the experience of God. But very honestly, I don't know anything about Gnosticism. And I know that in the 20th century, um, Dr. Jung was dissed by many people because they just wrote him off saying, oh, Jung was a Gnostic. Well, that's not true. I mean, he was a psychiatrist and he was one of the first psychologists per se. And whatever the Gnostics were, they were run out of the system in the third century by the Catholic Church, which which wanted to, the religious leaders wanted to interpose themselves between the individual and God, and they wanted to get people to pay up. And so, if you go to the Vatican, you can see what interposing yourself between God and the average person does for you, because people who have to believe are convinced that they also have to pay in order to um, get the information about God or get God's blessing. And so, over 2,000 years of development, it's with a lot of black power. And by black, I don't mean black as in human black, I mean dark power also at work. Um, you have what is today the Vatican. And so some of the finest artworks in the world are in the Vatican, and they are testimony to the value of pretending you have the one direct link to God. Okay. Sorry to be iconoclastic here, but that's the facts. And so I don't I don't ascribe to Gnosticism. I don't know what Gnosticism is in detail. There's a lot of detail that is known about it, but it's really irrelevant because Dr. Jung pointed out the source of all religions. This was the point that Edward Edinger made, and um, I often share Edward Edinger's interview, which I transcribed at one point, and I will put in the description of the playback for this video, in which he finally exposes this fact that Dr. Jung found the source of all religion, and it is religion is a genuine a genuine function in the human psyche, and that function, you cannot feel whole unless you have a connection with that function. However it's achieved, it can be achieved through all the religions of the world. There's no doubt about that. But the stories they tell, the narratives that they tell, are true in the psyche. They're not true in the physical world. And we've had so many people, hundreds of millions of people over the centuries who've been killed because one religion says my way is the right way and your way is the way of the devil. And so then they con a lot of young men to go out and fight their wars on that basis. And the young men feel it, and they're not mature enough to know better. And so they go out and fight these wars, and they constellate the warrior archetype, which is, all well and good. That warrior archetype is in everyone, and it's certainly within most men. And one has to, as a man, one has to prove his manhood by experiencing this warrior archetype, no matter how they do it. And that isn't to say one has to serve in the military. I mean, that was the path that I followed, but that's only because the military was the family business. I mean, I grew up in the U.S. Navy, and I've always been part of the military in one form or another, and I still carry my ID card as a retired officer. But my friends who fought against the Vietnam War and demonstrated against the Vietnam War, they were actually right. And I actually knew that at the time. I knew it from 1962. And it took great courage for them to fight the system. As I have done in the case of my foreclosure, I fought that system. But they were right to fight the system that was killing so many American young men, 58, and women, 58,000 of us. And I know 5 men on the wall in Washington, their names and who they were as living human beings. And it's just a terrible tragedy to lose those men. And so they are, not only are they a cost of war, they're a cost of waking up the human species to our own barbarian nature, and our own stupid nature as it relates to the way we follow our religions. And this is why Dr. Jung made the comment in paragraph 754 of Answer to Job that Christianity needed to be updated for modern categories of understanding. And I extrapolate from that to say that all the world's religions need to be updated for modern categories of understanding, which include the teachings of C.G. Jung, because I know the cost. And so Patrick says, why do they not do brain scans in the medical field? Um, no brain scans would seem like you are looking into the dark per se. Well, the matters that I'm talking about, you're not going to see in brain scans. I mean, you might, when somebody is having a vision or a dream, certainly the Logos guys who are running brain scans would see, some activity in the brain. But, if there was a brain scan going on at the time I had that numinous experience in 2016, they would have no clue what my experience is, not the nearest whit of a clue. And so the point is that we live in two worlds. We live in a physical world that we can see and touch, and we live in the psyche, which is, as Dr. Jung pointed out, every bit as big as the physical universe. And so a brain scan that's looking at the physical universe isn't going to see anything that's going on in the psyche, really. I mean, they might be able to get some very, very rough ideas about what's going on, but only in the very, it'd be like looking at clouds through smoke or something like that. And so, and Miss Hill says, found out fire was hot. And Patrick says, this is becoming my #1 YouTube channel. Thank you for that. That's great. And then Miss Stella says, I tithed recently for the first time. It felt good, but it seems my luminous events and were not increased in any way. Just felt good to make a tribute to that which I already knew. Well, I think that that's fair enough, and by no stretch of the imagination am I saying that anyone should ignore their religious tradition. Actually, those religious traditions have always served as psychotherapy. They're actually naturally evolved methods of psychotherapy. And so I've done this a few times before, but let me share the quote that I used in my talk about this point, because Dr. Jung spoke of it directly in volume 10 of the Collected Works. And so, yes, volume 10 of the Collected Works. So here it is. Theologians and psychologists are in the same business. Here's the quote. For thousands of years, the mind of man was worried about the sick soul, perhaps even earlier than it did about the sick body. The propitiation of gods, the perils of the soul and its salvation, these are not yesterday's problems. Religions are naturally evolved, and I added the two words naturally evolved. Religions are naturally evolved psychotherapeutic systems in the truest sense of the word, and on the grandest scale. They express the whole range of the psychic problem in mighty images. They are the avowal and recognition of the soul, and at the same time, the revelation of the soul's nature. And that's from paragraph 367 of volume 10, which is called Civilization in Transition. So my point about that is, if going to church is soothing to you, if it helps you with your psyche, you don't have to know why. Okay. In other words, when I was 30 and I was a young lawyer, I had couple of little baby girls in my family, and I did all the traditional things of uh, baby boom men. I I became a lawyer, and then I joined the local church, and and I became a deacon. So I was a deacon in the Reformed Church, and at that time I was struggling with what God was, and I remember um, asking the pastor, could you define God for me? And what he said to me was total gibberish. I have no idea what he said anymore, but it was he just was. He was a young man also, and he was just freebooting the answer. I said, define God for me, and no, he couldn't do it. Um, but what I knew is that every Sunday when I went to church, when I'd come out of church, I would feel better from the standpoint of my psyche, I guess. In other words, I might be depressed or worried about some problem in my life, but if I went to church, um, then I felt better. And I'm sure lots of people have that experience all the time. And churches, there's millions of people who are very devout in their religion, regardless of what it is, in the United States. And uh, they work, religions do work to help us through our week. Um, and it's a matter of stepping out of our everyday uh, helter skelter kind of life that we live these days, the chaos of the 21st century, and allowing us to reflect for an hour. And, that's also what prayer does for you. And it's what meditation does for you. And so that is a healthy thing to do. And human beings discovered this long, long, long before Dr. Jung came along. And what Dr. Jung recognized is that these are psychological functions that the religions are addressing. And, like all early Iron Age men, the people who wrote the Bible, and mind you, the Bible wasn't even put together until 325 AD by the Emperor Constantine in Nicaea, the Council of Nicaea. Um, they didn't know what we know today. And so they did the best they could. And what they did know is their own experience and how they could explain it so that the average human being at that time could understand what was going on. And so the Bible is true. It's 100% true, as is every other scripture in the world of every religion. They're all true because they are naturally evolved therapeutic systems, and they all work, but they work in the psyche. They aren't truth in the physical world. Now, to the extent the Bible is a genuine reflection of events that occurred, that certainly is true in the physical world. Even some people even doubt the existence of Jesus Christ in the physical world, but I have no doubt that he existed and that he was a man, and he was the God man, as Dr. Jung said, because he had an experience that only this one man had at that time, 2,000 years ago. But now we can know that all of us can have this experience similar to God or to Jesus, and experience that in our lifetimes. And so this is why at the end of Answer to Job, paragraph 758, the last paragraph in Answer to Job, Dr. Jung talks about the Christification of many. And what he means is exactly what I'm saying, that we can understand ourselves also as sons and daughters of God. And so that means that that can give greater meaning to your going to church, Mistel, and to your tithing, because it's it's valid and relevant. And I'm asked by Patrick, am I familiar with poetry and hexameter epic poetry? Well, I'm certainly familiar with poetry because I've actually published a book of poetry under my pen name, which is my pen name is David Gerritsen. I'll put my pen name on the chat here. I've written 2 books under this pen name, and the book of poetry I wrote is entitled Seduction for the Soul. And the poems that are in that book were written in about 1993 or so. So they represent where I was at that point of time. But there's a lot of poems in there, and you might find them interesting. And also my novel was written under that pen name, and that's called Mako, Memoirs of a Woman. But I would urge upon you caveat emptor, because Mako contains what we euphemistically call erotica. And however, it's all true, because Mako represents the autobiography of my anima from 1962 to 1993. But again, when I wrote that novel, that was another numinous experience for me, and it certainly woke me up. And I actually didn't publish it until 2014, and only in Kindle format. But anyway, it's there. So he says, I found that is what seemed to be currently sung by the muses. Currently, very interesting. Could be, I don't know. Mistel says, war seems to be a way to generate revenue, especially the drug war. Yeah, definitely. It's the military-industrial complexes, as Dwight Eisenhower talked about. Let's see here. Jaguar says, that's again the difficult problem of how the consciousness is related to the brain. Well, the brain is the operating system of consciousness and unconscious, but it is not the contents of the psyche. it's think of, our bodies are declining assets. Certainly, when you get into your 75th year, as I am, uh, you start to see how the Walkman starts to seem like an old model, but nonetheless, it's not the software, the psyche that is something else. It's not in the physical world. Um, and we are talking about this extensively in the Monday night class, so I'm not going to go into it in great detail right now. So 3R Post says, I think brain scans would be to the numinous as sheet music is to hearing a symphony. Yes, I would say that's a good analogy. Martin says, it's interesting to think in how different types benefit. For example, some sensors may get the practical side, one of community and support. And I certainly intended to mention that, which is true, that religions do offer one community and relationship with others, which is very important. As Dr. Jung pointed out, we're actually community animals, we're herd animals, and so we do seek community. And one of the very best ways to get it, at least in my country, is to go to church. But it can also be experienced at the mosque or at a temple or any other place, and so it's not exclusive to Christianity, and that's where we went off the rails as human beings. Millennia ago, when we started to slice and dice and say my religion is right and yours is wrong, that's where Protestantism went off the rails, because it broke away from Catholicism and then broke into 400 different sects, because everybody had a different point of view. And so they said, okay, I'm going to make mine called Methodism or whatever it is, and I'm going to call mine baptism, or Baptist church, or a Presbyterian, or what have you. And when you slice and dice like that, it doesn't end well. And the point is, they're all doing the same thing. So all these religions have to be brought forward so that they're understood in modern categories of understanding and what they're doing. And this is the brilliance of Carl Jung, and probably the only person that could have done it, because he was able to bring forth God and show that there is a living God. And once you have that experience, as Dr. Jung said in his interview with the BBC, which you can hear in YouTube, and there's a short version of it where he said, I have no need to believe. He's asked if he believes in God. He says, I have no need to believe, I know. And when I saw that the first time, that was a luminous moment for me, because I said to myself, oh, I too know. And that is the point. I had to spend then the next 10 years figuring out what it was that I knew that Dr. Jung also knew. But now I get it. Now I've grokked it. And when you grok it, then there's no going back. And Patrick says, my father, my brother, and I actually had many conversations about feeling better after Sunday Mass. Indeed. Shauna says, extroverts get something different than introverts from it as well. Yes, that's probably true. That's no doubt true. And as Patrick or someone mentioned, um, an extrovert would be more in tune with the community aspects of it, whereas I'm an introvert, so the community doesn't make much difference to me. Um, or it doesn't make as much difference as for me. Obviously, community is important for me because I wouldn't be doing this session with you folks if I didn't have a need for community. Um, and and then there's a couple. Uh, and let's see. Thank you for suggesting that people subscribe to me. Yes, I do have a Patreon page, and it's um, it's patreon.com/Skip Conover. You can find it there, and I would be grateful if you would patronize me because this has gotten quite expensive. I'm now up to oh, well, I spend about $500 a month easily on maintaining my technology so that I can do this at all, including I spend about $200 a month so that I maintain a Zoom account that allows me to have um, 500 users at one time connected, and that has proved to be necessary. When I had Mary Stein on, and next week, this coming Saturday, we'll be having Steve Buser, who is the publisher, one of the publishers, along with Len Cruz of Chiron Publications, which is not only the publisher of the book that we're talking about, Jung's Red Book for Our Time. Today I'm working with this book, but he's also a co-author with Murray Stein of a book called A Map of the Soul, and let's see, what is it called exactly? Okay, it's called Map of the Soul 7, Persona, Shadow, and Ego in the World of BTS. So as many of you know, I'm a fan of the Korean band BTS because I believe that they have turned education on its ear. And certainly they've turned Jungian psychology on its ear, because what they've done is, by publicizing Dr. Stein's books, they've drawn attention to these ideas of persona, shadow, and ego, which are Dr. Jung's ideas. And so Dr. Buser will be with us next Saturday at 1 o'clock, I believe. And so if you are not aware of our mailing list, let me give you the mailing list so that you can have notice of these events that we conduct. That is the link to get yourself on the mailing list. And next week I'm expecting to basically fill up the Zoom channel. We had, I think, at top, when Murray Stein was with us on the 9th of August, we had 446 people simultaneously at one point between the YouTube channel and the Zoom call. So I will be publicizing it to the YouTube, or to the fan group of BTS on Twitter. And so I expect a lot of people to be there. There are 80 million fans of BTS at least. And okay, so Patricia asked for a link to the Patreon. I guess I can probably give you that. Let me do that. But you know, if one way to appreciate what I'm doing. So let me see here. How am I doing this? Okay, so here's the Patreon. But also, I just point out that in all these live streams, when you catch me live as you are right now, you can always make a small contribution through the little $ that appears under the chat, which is a super chat. And you could do that, and also that would highlight any comment that you have on YouTube. So, you know, if you feel moved to do that, that's even a little easier than Patreon if you're on live. If you're not on live, I certainly welcome the Patreon subscription, and we do ask for a small donation on the advanced group, which is $10 a month. Not everyone pays it. If you can't afford $10 a month, please still ask to be a member of the advanced group, and we will let you in. It's not a question of that, but as I say, it does cost money, and it's me investing in it, and always has been for the last 5 years. So if you can help with that a little bit, that's certainly welcome. Let's see. Going on here. So Patrick says, I just like being around people who help and make the world better. For sure, I can gladly pay for this amazing advice. And by the way, the advanced reading group Dropbox is not openly available. The one that we use for the Monday night group is openly available, and there's a lot of valuable information in there. The advanced group Dropbox has what I consider to be graduate level seminars in both Ion and Mysterium Conjunctionis, in addition to other books. We're currently working with Lament of the Dead, which is a book with the transcripts of 15 conversations between Sona Shamdasani and James Hillman that was published shortly before Hillman's death in 2011. And so we're currently going through that book paragraph by paragraph. But we have done also on Ion, which has 32 two-hour sessions, and Mysterium, which has 45 two-hour sessions. And those are not published on YouTube. So if you want to be a part of that, you need to let me know so that I can give you the link to the advanced reading room. And let's see. So Gray Blue says, I have been recommended many times to read The Map of the Soul. I've heard great things about it. Well, yes, Map of the Soul is a good book. And I think Mary Stein, it was sort of an obscure book for many years. I think Mary wrote it in 1998 or something like that. And it probably had a readership of 500 to 1,000 every year since then. But when BTS picked it up, all of a sudden it's now a bestseller. And so I have to recommend reading that, and also reading this book, which is a bit simpler. In this book, Map of the Soul 7, which is aimed at the BTS following. Dr. Stein has given a Jungian commentary on all of the tracks of Map of the Soul Persona and Map of the Soul 7, which is the 2 albums that BTS made based on Dr. Jung's work. And so they put these books on their website, and they caused young people especially to go to that website, see that book, and say, wow, if BTS is reading that, I really want to know. This is why I'm so crazy about BTS, because they've turned education on its ear by showing young people what they need to understand. I had struggled for 20 years trying to say, well, how could we teach people in high school, let's say, even junior high school, something about psychology? It would be tremendously helpful. It certainly would have been helpful to me because I did have one divorce. I've been married to Debbie for now 35 years, essentially, but my first marriage was 17 years, and it collapsed because I didn't know anything about psychology. I never did take a psychology course in my life. I still haven't. I've taught a couple, but I've never taken one. And I've been studying Dr. Jung's work since 1987. And so I guess I'm a kind of expert on Jung's general work. I'm certainly not a mental health professional, and I never have claimed to be that. But it certainly has helped me, and that's why I was drawn to do this in the first place. And Thurpo says, start with Man and His Symbols, which I highly recommend, and which I did in 1990. And in fact, for beginners, let me just give you, I'm going to give you a link to one of the early lectures I did, which is on how to start studying Jungian psychology. It might be helpful to you. It's a 30-minute talk, which I did in 2016 on how to start studying Jungian psychology. And I think that may be helpful guidance to you. So this is the link. This is lecture 3, how to start studying Jung. And here's the link. That's the link to it. And so that way, you don't have to waste a lot of time. As I said, I'm thrilled to have the Black Books today. And by the way, this afternoon at 2 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. London time, Dr. Sonu Shamdasani is going to have a live stream on the process he went through to do the Black Books. And so let me give you a link to that. And if you choose to join it, it's sponsored by the Philemon Foundation, and it will be a live stream with Dr. Shamdasani today. And I'm just going to give you the link. So it's not too late. It's going to start in 4 hours and 15 minutes from now. I will be there. It does cost $30 to attend that, but that money presumably goes to the Philemon Foundation, and I'm sure the $30 will be money well spent. And so if you want to hear that, at the beginning of this session, for those of you who came late, I did discuss the black books that are on my shelf right next to me right now. And you can see some of what I showed earlier, arrivals. And so I really recommend that you try to watch that video, that live stream at 2 p.m. It's on the Philemon Foundation. They're sponsoring it. So, and 3PO says there are better places than Amazon to buy esoteric books. Yep, that's I'm just a pedestrian guy, plebeian. I just point people at Amazon, but yes, there are better places to buy things like that. And so, and Shauna Dawn says, Jung is barely mentioned in my psych major, 95% Freud, precisely. There are reasons for that, but people didn't understand Jung for a long time. And one of the people that didn't understand Jung was Freud. And Freud was, like Dr. Jordan Peterson, Freud was a scientific method logos guy. And Freud was an atheist who thought the issues of God were not true or not real. But Dr. Jung pointed out that the psyche is real, and that's where God lives. And so so they tried to use the statistics and the scientific method to help people psychologically. And what they've done is they've helped millions of Americans become addicted to opioids. And so now it's time to show people that there's a better way, and that will happen. And very honestly, there are very, very few psych departments in the United States that will give Jung more than 15 minutes of space, if that much. And at one point, I tried to get an adjunct job teaching Jungian psychology at 50 local universities in my area, in the Washington area, and I got no interest whatsoever. And some people were really quite ugly about it. So I said, so then I remembered what Dr. Jung said in Man and His Symbols. I'll just remind you of that because it's something that all of us should think about. It's, if you have the hardbound copy, let me see if I can get that so you can see what it is. Once again, I have to take my cloaking off. Okay. So here's the hardbound copy of Man and His Symbols. And that was recommended earlier by one of you. And I really urge you to try to get the hardbound copy, because the hardbound copy has color images in it and more images in it, which are very useful. The paperback copy only has black and white images. But here's the point. And so it's just one paragraph, and it's on page 101 of the hardbound copy. And actually, there's a PDF version of this book on available in my Dropbox, but here's what he said. As any change must begin somewhere, it is the single individual who will experience it and carry it through. The change must indeed begin with an individual. It might be any one of us. Nobody can afford to look around and to wait for somebody else to do what he is loath to do himself. But since nobody seems to know what to do, it might be worthwhile for each of us to ask himself whether by any chance his or her unconscious may know something that will help us. Certainly the conscious mind seems unable to do anything useful in this respect. Man today is painfully aware of the fact that neither his great religions nor his various philosophies seem to provide him with those powerful animating ideas that would give him the security he needs in the face of the present condition of the world. And so I took that paragraph very seriously. And when I saw that I couldn't get an adjunct teaching position teaching Jungian psychology, I decided to teach it myself online, and that's what I've been doing since June the 1st of 2016, and you now can find 1,100 videos on this channel, all on that topic. And so I am the individual who found something. I found something in my psyche that needed to be done, and I had been wondering why doesn't the Jungian community get this information out to the public? And so I was always waiting for these PhDs to do that, and they never did. And or they did it in very limited amount. Okay, so one of the ways I got into this was a book called Women Who Run with the Wolves by Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, and two other books by Jean Shinoda Bolen, Gods in Every Man and Goddesses in Every Woman. Those three books were written in the 1990s, and I read them all, and they did help me. But at that time, there just wasn't enough writing for laymen like us. And so instead of being loath to do it, I decided I would do it if they wouldn't do it. And fair enough. If you're a Jungian analyst, just think about it. You have 7 or 8 people coming to you every day, 7 or 8 hours of being down in someone else's psyche. And what happens is that your psyche gets engaged with their psyche. And so you do put your own psyche at risk. And so you need to be trained to do that. And this is why I don't interpret dreams of others in this channel, nor visions, because that requires a professional, and I'm not qualified to do that. But the point is, it's a busman's holiday for them. In other words, the busman's holiday means the bus driver takes his vacation by riding in a bus, and that's a busman's holiday. And so for Jungian analysts, if they're at it for 7, 8 hours a day, why would they want to go home and then write about it for another 2 or 3 hours every day? So I do understand why it was slow to happen, but I just felt it was needed, and it apparently is true. And so let me just see what else, other comments. Jung put the soul back in psychology. That's not good for the medical industrial complex. Well, it might be if we start to recognize its value, which I certainly do. And if I hadn't dealt with my own depressions over the years by reading Dr. Jung's work, um, I probably would have ended up either an alcoholic or on drugs myself, which did happen to my grandfather, and he died at the age of 68. And so, uh, you know, and all of us have traumas through our lives. And, I urge you, if you have trauma, to read a book called Trauma in the Soul. I happen to have it right here next to me, so let me pull it out. Okay, so this is the book, Trauma in the Soul by Donald Kalsched. Okay, and so if you haven't read this book, and if you're having depression or having anxiety or whatever it is, I think this book could help you. And I urge you to read it before anything else. And Dr. Kalsched did do a video about trauma in the soul on the Pacifica website, on the Pacific Graduate Institute website, and so you can find it there and watch that. So anyway, Jaguar Focus says, you are the right person for this teaching because people can relate to you as a person, and your warmth and wisdom are genuine. I detect a deep understanding of the human soul in you. It's one of the reasons I keep coming back. Patrick says, you are playing your part in society. The elders are a very deep need. We have, in many respects, lost, and you are lighting the way just by your finding your flow. Thank you, Patrick. Shana says, current psychology attempts to encourage people to avoid the dark night of the soul, an experience which is often a necessary prerequisite to further development. And, that may be. And what I would urge you to be cognizant of is the fact that you cannot avoid it. You cannot get away from it. And even Jordan Peterson, as his psyche started to get inflated by his success with his reading, with his books, and then went on this world tour of whatever it was, 150 cities or whatever it was. And you can imagine that being in a crowd like that, holding forth, is very validating. Obviously, the President of the United States likes that too, but you can't avoid the dark night of the soul. And Jordan Peterson is the poster boy of that. And if the President of the United States loses the election in a couple of weeks, I expect that he will enter a dark night of the soul also. And so he would be well advised to come watch some of my videos. He may be doing it from his dacha in Crimea or someplace. Some of my friends and I have been speculating on where he'll try to live under political asylum after his presidency. And I actually think that if he loses the election, he may leave before the end of his presidency so that he can actually get out of town, because after noon on January the 20th, 2021, assuming he is not president, if he is not president, he will be subject to arrest. for things that he's been avoiding. And so I actually think that if he loses the election, he may leave before the end of his presidency while he still has the power. Yeah, Shauna, I actually don't know if it can be stymied. I presume it can't. And part of the reason I do presume it is that, I've had more than one. I've had a series of dark nights of the soul because in my lifetime. And so in order to be what I call seaworthy people, mature human beings, we need to understand that those dark times can happen. And we need to be able to find our way out of it. These days, because I've read Dr. Jung so much, if I get into a depression for whatever it is, all I have to do is pick up any book by C.G. Jung and start reading it randomly, and immediately I'm calmed. And because it immediately, for me, it references everything that Dr. Jung ever said just by starting to read anything. And so, it's like people who find the Bible very comforting. They've heard the stories all their lives. And so if they get into a depression, they go to the Bible, and justifiably so, it is calming to them. And so, the point is that we cannot escape it. And Patrick Hollywood says Jordan Peterson is amazing. He's a strong human being. Yes, indeed. I don't deny that. And mind you, I agree with 99.5% of everything that Dr. Peterson ever said, and the role that I think he's played in the last few years has been as a father figure for many, particularly young men who, many of whom may not have been raised in a household with a father. But we have about 50% of our marriages in the United States that are broken. And if you're broken and you're being raised by your mother and you're a young man, you don't have that father figure that you need to guide you as a young man. And that's pretty tough. And so I think that Jordan Peterson has provided that role of father figure to many young men, many nihilistic young men. And so that's to his credit. What he did, though, was he expended all of his energy on others, and through his visits around the world, and it just depleted him to the point where he needed help himself. And that's where he got into a problem. Juan asked me, am I the eldest child in the family? The answer to that is yes, I was the eldest sibling among my siblings. I did have a brother who died after 3 liver transplants in 1988. And that's another long story, because he died because he drank mountain spring water in Vail, Colorado. Put me off Coors beer for life. That's a very long story. I'm not going to get into that. So, Jaguar, I never took any medications while going through the dark night of my soul. YouTube was a tremendous resource. It's like my psyche was guiding me to discover the real world behind the world. Very good. And one of my Zoom followers here says the eldest is very responsible. Okay. Yeah, I always, my mother used to say I was 40 years old the day I was born. And because I was always worried about adult issues from early on. But on this dark night of the soul thing, just to give you a couple of examples of how you can face more than one in a lifetime. So let me give you some examples. Okay, so one dark night of the soul was the fact that my country was getting into a war that was obviously going to take a lot of my generation, which was the Vietnam War. So even in 1964, when I was graduating from high school and starting college, I realized, I was going through a dark night of the soul, and our country was going through a dark night of the soul, which was evident by the anti-war demonstrations. And my way of working through it, because I knew I was going into the military, but because that was my commitment to the family business, I guess. My father was a naval officer. I was able to work through that during my college years. So by the time I was a junior, I was committed to joining the U.S. Marines, which I did, and became an officer the day I graduated from college. And, most men of my generation, many men of my generation simply avoided it. I went to a men's college, which was Hamilton's college. It's now co-educational, but in those years it was still a men's college, and there were 180 members of my class, and of that 180, only 16 ended up in the military, and three of the well, at least one of them died. The other two men that I know who died were from different classes, but they were at Hamilton when I was there. And that's just from Hamilton. I know many other men, including my roommate in the basic school, who died. So that was one dark night of the soul, which is, am I going to go in the military, or am I going to resist, as many of my generation did? And both were warriors. Both were proving themselves. And I simply chose that my way of going forward would be to enlist. But I don't want to say that the men who didn't go in the military were less courageous. In many ways, they were more courageous, because they saw that their country was wrong, and they were willing to take the consequences of not serving. And my closest friend in life left the United States and went to Canada and never came back. And he still lives in Canada. And, he's had an individuated life. He's probably the most individuated person I know. And he was the son of a 30-year Navy veteran And so for him, it must have been very difficult to make that decision, but he did make it. And so that was one. Then I was in the Marines. And so just as many of you know from my Marine career, I served for 23 years. But the last thing that happened was, boom, I broke my leg. Well, that was a pretty dark night of the soul because I was flat on my back for 13 weeks. I couldn't put my foot down for 8 of those weeks. And my Marine Corps career was over, and pretty emphatically. And, I suffer the consequences of that to this day because I have a artificial ankle now, which I have since 2017. But, the Navy put my leg back together for me, so I was able to heal in 1990 when this happened. It's a hell of a way to start a decade. On January the 4th, 1990 is the date that I broke my leg. And so then I had, after Vietnam, I'd gone to law school, and I loved going to law school. But then in the following 5 years, I practiced law for 5 years, and I found out I detest the profession. I detest practicing law. And so that led to another dark night of the soul, which is, okay, now I've just put 3 years in law school and three in practicing law, and I don't like it. So what should I do? So what I decided to do the last 2 years I practiced law was I went to business school in an executive program, and became an MBA, which allowed me to get out of the law, get out of the practice of law. And that led to me going to Japan. But, each of those traumas, the trauma of after putting all this effort into becoming a lawyer, finding out, oh, by the way, I detest the practice of law, that wasn't good. And so I'm only recounting this to point out to you that you probably have been through traumas, lesser traumas. I'm not saying lesser than mine, but, maybe they're not as traumatic as you might imagine a dark night of the soul might be. Something like Jordan Peterson, who nearly died. But also I neglected to mention that, when I was 18 years old, in my freshman year of college, we were going for Thanksgiving vacation. And on Wednesday, the 25th of November, 1964, the car that I was in a terrible auto accident. And fortunately, I was not driving, but the man I was behind the driver, and the man who was in the right side of the back seat was killed. The man right next to me had his collarbone broken in 2 places and his pelvis broken in 2 places. And I was the only one to walk away from the accident unscathed. But it had a huge psychological toll on me, which nearly caused me to flunk out of college. And so that too was a dark night of the soul. Just, so stuff happens, and you need to maintain balance. And so that's what we're talking about here is how to maintain balance when really terrible things happen in everybody's life. I mean, everybody faces the loss of a parent, a mother and a father, at or pretty much everybody. I mean, my brother didn't. He didn't face it because he died when he was 39. But my parents certainly went through a dark night of the soul when we lost my brother. And so, that's the way the world is. And we need to, we're problem solving creatures. We solve 100 problems a day at least. And as mature human beings, we have to be able to solve those problems. And some of them are pretty nasty and can be referred to as traumatic. And it's those problems that we're talking about. And it doesn't seem to me that the way to solve those problems is to pick up a bottle of whiskey or to start injecting opioids in your arm. So we're talking about those, and you can have, and if you understand what numinous experiences is, and that within you is the power to get through it. Okay, there was 1981 movie entitled Chariots of Fire, and it was about the 1924 Olympic team. And in that movie, there's a quarter-mile race in which Eric Liddell is running. And there's a voiceover that's very powerful there. And the voiceover is, so where does the power come from to see the race through to the end? From within. That's the answer. The power where does the power come from to see the race, which is your life, through to the end, comes from within, and it comes from God. And so Eric Liddell, who won that particular race and had a successful race in the Olympics, then went back to China, where he was a missionary and where he was murdered by the Japanese in 1936. So 12 years later, he was murdered by the Japanese. But that was a man who knew where the power came from to see the life, to see the race through to the end. And so that's what we all have to get in touch with, is that power that's in the psyche. So Patrick says, I'm wondering what chaos is. And Martin says, I think chaos is your weakest function. So for an intuitive, it would be the material to some point. Well, chaos is, this is my metaphor for chaos. This is the earth, in which we're inundated by information at the moment. And so chaos is both psychic and material. Just think of the things that we're facing at this point in time. And if you're a young person, 20 or something, and you're facing it, you have to be almost overwhelmed, because think of this, and I say this often, the person of the 16th century, so only 400 years ago, didn't have as much information in a lifetime as we get in the Sunday New York Times, one edition. And so that statistic was already out there before the World Wide Web. But today, we are faced with all the information of the world, with the exception of government and company secrets. And so that means, here on YouTube or anywhere on the internet, anything can happen. It's totally chaotic. And you have to decide what's the information that's important to you and how do you recognize that. Well, it helps to understand numinosity, because sometimes numinosity points the way. But you need to find a roadmap for that. And traditionally, that roadmap was offered by organized religion for millennia. And so on Monday nights these days at 8 p.m., I'm offering a year-long series about the Tarot. Now, you might think that, oh, wow, the Tarot is woo-woo, it's something that young high school age girls play with. Well, that's sort of true, but they mostly get interested in divination, and they get a small synchronistic experience, and so they get excited about that and giggle. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that the Tarot is a system that was developed in the 15th century, and it hasn't changed since then. In other words, we have the Visconti deck and the Marseille deck that are the oldest Tarot decks that we are conscious of, and the key cards haven't changed. And the reason is that the Tarot refers to, in the major arcana, the Tarot refers to archetypal events that occur in your life that exist but cannot be seen. So they're in what in previous centuries was called the divine realm. They exist but cannot be seen. But nonetheless, they exist. And so the scientists who say it has to have a physical presence or it's not real, that's not true, because E equals mc squared, and energy is certainly real. All scientists believe that. And so the major arcana represent the energies which are in the universe and are undeniable. And so we're talking about those energies one by one through this coming year. And so you do need some roadmap, okay? Jung's Map of the Soul, which Mary Stein wrote and which is the basis of the BTS albums, is one way to see a roadmap in your psyche. And reading Jung's work is one way to see a roadmap in your psyche. And I'm offering one more that Dr. Jung referred to only lightly, but because it's such a pure representation of the archetypal energies, that's why we're spending a year working on it. So in any case, that's what that's about. Let's see what else. Look, I can't keep up with everything, but let me go back to something that Patrick asked. How did you, Skip, become so grounded and seem to make getting past things so easily? Well, I don't mean to suggest that it's been easy. Not at all. But the way I've developed a perspective about things. And so, you have to develop a perspective about this. Suppose tomorrow you're in an auto accident and you lose your right arm or your right leg. That's a pretty traumatic thing. But there's two things that have to happen. One is a physical thing, which is that you have to heal physically. But the other thing is that you have to develop a different attitude about your life and what it is going to be. And how you will be in the world and how you will make the most of it. And so there are plenty of examples. Tammy Duckworth is senator from Illinois. I'm sure she would have been happy to have her legs, but she was shot down in a helicopter in Iraq and lost her legs. And obviously that's a dark night of the soul when something like that happens. And yet she not only healed, but managed to put a perspective on that made her a United States senator. And so if you want to be grounded, I guess the answer is to go through a lot of trauma. I don't suggest you go out and look for trauma, because trauma will find you, okay, one way or another. And so the answer is that, life goes on, and life finds a way. And so how I'm different is I've been through lots. I've also lived many different experiences, including literally flying around the world 75 times in my career. And so, I have a lot to draw from, and I guess that's how you become grounded, is that you go out and get experience. I mean, I hear nihilists talking about how do I get interest in my life? And the answer is you got to get one. Okay. In other words, if you're sitting on the sofa in your mother's basement looking at YouTube videos and you can't get the motivation to get out of bed or get dressed, that's nihilism. But, the way to get out of nihilism is to get a life. Go out and meet a girl or a boy. Suddenly, things start to happen that give life meaning. That's what I'd say. That's pretty general, but Jaguar Focus says, I'm worried for the teens and the young 20-year-olds. I see the change in them all around me, stressed out and depressed and narcissistic. I'm extra compassionate in my interactions with them. And, they have to just get a life. They have to start doing something. And we all make mistakes in life. And somehow when we're young, we have the idea that we have to be perfect. Well, we don't have to be perfect. All we have to do is live our lives, and life will find a way. And so everybody makes mistakes. And the key to success is make your mistakes as quick as you can. Because the sooner you make mistakes, the sooner you will mature, and the sooner you will become wise. As William Blake once said, if a fool will stick to his foolish activity, he will become wise. And that's what he meant, that the fool who rushes in, and that's the first card in the tarot, or actually the zero card. It's the starting point in the tarot, the party that journeys through the experiences. He steps off a ledge, not seeing where the next step will be. And then you become smarter and wiser about what you're doing. And just even this YouTube channel is an example. When I started, I had no idea what I was doing or whether anybody would be interested. And I finally started the channel, and session one that I conducted, no one appeared. And fortunately, I had, at that time, I had this Periscope function, and I ended up with 35 people on Periscope listening. And so, even though there was nobody in the room with me, and oh, by the way, there's nobody in the room with me now, I was able to talk to that community, and that got me started. And I didn't know what I'd be teaching or how to teach it or what I should do, but here I am in the 5th year of this, and you know, I've taken it one step at a time, and here we are. So you know, that's how you get a life and you get something. And so what I always urge people to do is you must do something creative. And this building behind me is Dr. Jung's testament in stone to what I'm about to tell you, which is that you must be creative. You must be in contact with your psyche, and you must be in contact with your psyche through creativity. That's the way you communicate with your psyche initially, especially. And so what happens if you do something creative is your psyche starts to communicate with you, and you start to realize it. You start to feel things coming through. So it doesn't matter what you do, but whatever you do, you should, go to an art store, go to the tool department in Sears, go to a cooking store, what have you. Pick up anything whatsoever, and start to work with it. And your psyche will start to tell you what to do next. And at the beginning, whatever you do is not going to be pretty, but as you start to do it, things change and your psyche helps you. And so it doesn't matter what it is. It can be building a junk automobile in your garage, or it can be doing woodworking, or it can be painting or sculpture, or it can be making an omelet. As I've said many times, I begin every morning, or many mornings. I don't do it on Sundays because I have to get up too early and my wife isn't awake yet. But most days I make an omelet for my wife. And what that does is creating the omelet gets the flow of my psyche going. And so I get in communication with my psyche as many mornings as I can by making an omelet. And so that's one way to do it. It's not the only way by any means, but you can do it by doing a journal, something like that. And so we're going to be doing we are doing a tremendous exercise on the collective unconscious before we're going to present what we've done on November 7th. But there is a video on this YouTube channel about the project. So others of you who would like to participate, we're suggesting it's based on a doodle, which is what Colleen Kibert taught us to do a few weeks ago. But it can be anything, do anything creatively in this period. And then on November 7th, we're going to, and do it every day for 15 minutes, whatever it is. And then on the 7th, of November, we're going to present what's come up. And so I've been doodling in a mandala for myself, and just in 2-3 weeks since we started the process, my mandalas have gotten much different. And so I know that my psyche is communicating with me. And so, if you do something every day, then the idea of the project is that you'll submit 3 items from before November 2nd. So not later than November 2nd, you'll submit 3 items and that you do in daily pieces. And then one more piece between Election Day and November 7th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. If you'll submit those to me, I'll put them in a PowerPoint, and we're going to go through everybody's experiences and have you describe your experiences. And it's already become quite interesting. And I'm going to have difficulty choosing which ones of my 3 or which are going to be my 3. But anyway, I urge you to join us if you can. Shauna says, okay, I'm just going to skip through. Shauna says, whoops, it flipped on me. Shauna says, anxiety and depression, etc., have increased in proportion to the emphasis on empiricism over the spiritual, deeper, invisible things. Yes, agreed. I think Skip had his, I think Skip and had this share of suffering in different times, and he has used his intellect and grit studying the world and his soul to reach the grounded energy that manifests. Yes, that's what has done. I was wondering if you could connect numerology of the I Ching to the numerology of the Tarot. Gunnar, that would be a colossal task. There certainly is a connection, and you might want to write a book on that. Certainly there is a connection. And and certainly I just couldn't do it in 50 words, even however long we have left here. So, but I assure you that there is a connection. I'm going to, at the end of this, I'm going to tell you about my vanity license plate. But anyway, Martin says, it can be also that you get irked by shadow. For example, some sensor types that are very much valuing what will display something, maybe even themselves, in what may be perceived is a narcissistic, like I guess he's saying, in expression, for example. Yeah. I'm not sure what to say about that, Martin, but not saying some suffer from posting 1 million selfies of their own face on social media. Yeah, I mean, if that floats your boat, do it. I mean, there was a guy who took a picture of himself every day for like 10 years or something like that, a selfie, and then he put it in a video, and I started to do that, and it's very revealing. So it's worth doing. If you want to know about yourself, just take a selfie of yourself every day. Try to put it in the same position on your screen, and then do like a time lapse through the years. Do it for 1 year, and you'll see it'll certainly bring things up. So it's not a bad idea. And so Jaguar Focus says, agreed, that's the primary reason to avoid social media. The more grandiose one becomes, the more difficult it is to maintain that persona. The key is to try to be in true connection with the universe and let it guide you. And, so Ernest Hemingway was once asked, how did he write his novels? And he said, you simply open a vein and bleed. And And basically, that's what I do, especially in these Sunday morning sessions where I start a discussion based on someone's profound essay. And then you ask questions and I start to say things. When we terminate this session, I will have absolutely no idea, absolutely not the faintest clue what I've said in this 2 hours or nearly 3 hours now. No idea. And the reason for that is that what I do is I open a vein and bleed. In other words, I connect with a part of myself that is myself. And I'm not doing it egoistically. In other words, if I'm doing it egoistically, then I'm going to give you a syllabus and tell you all the details that I'm going to talk to you about. I mean, the standard way of training in the Marine Corps is tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. And and this way, this unconscious way, opening the unconscious, is before I start, I have no idea what I'm going to tell you. I tell you, and then I have no idea what I've told you. And so I hope it's useful. but that's basically what I've done. And so if you want to write a novel, you have to connect to your unconscious. And so when I wrote Mako, Memoirs of a Woman, that came purely, completely from my unconscious. And my ego mind did not work that out and figure out what to say. And I know what was happening to me in a very rough sense, but every day when I was taken to my computer, once I put my hands on the keyboard, I have no recollection of writing the novel. What I have a recollection of is seeing the imagery that was conveyed in those words. And so the novel basically wrote itself from my unconscious. And so when you hear about writers who are suffering from writer's block, who are drinking or abusing drugs because they can't get back to that space, that's what they're trying to get back to. They're trying to get back to this unconscious flow that is guiding them, and guiding them in amazing ways. I mean, you can read Tolstoy or Dostoevsky or any of the great novelists, Victor Hugo, and they all write from that place. Ernest Hemingway obviously wrote from that place. And so, that's not that's an experience that I've had, and I would have no problem getting back to that place. I just don't have the time to write novels anymore. So I can either do this or I can write novels. And so at the moment I'm doing this. We'll see what happens next year. So Jaguar Focus says, Sam Harris said it very well. Try to be motivated by love and guided by reason. Recipe for a good life. Yeah, fair enough. That's a good point. Martin, creativity is key. I know for me, it has kept me stable. My unconscious brings forth what I cannot interpret. Absolutely. And Jaguar says, every person that has gotten under my skin has been my guru. They have exposed my blind spots, and where the attachment of my ego are, I'm still a work in progress, but more at peace with the work. And I would say we're all works in process. The journey doesn't have an end. We have a popular television advertisement right now that talks about the journey has no end. And that's exactly right. Individuation goes on throughout your life. Um, and it's nice to know you're doing that, though. I mean, as Dr. Jung said in Answer to Job, paragraph 746, I believe, he said, you can either know about it, know it's happening, and walk in upright, or you're going to be dragged along. You're going to be dragged along by yourself. But either way, your individuation is going to happen. And so it's just nice to be able to go in walking upright. Let's see. So if only we had an awareness that made us realize we should apply the wisdom we bring up with others in conversations. Well, absolutely. In fact, I often have to go back and look at my own videos to consciously grok my whatever it is I've said. Robert Moore also has some great work on creativity and the dragon. Martin, do come to our November 7th thing, because you'll see some things about the dragon there. I'm kind of embarrassed of my username now. It's not at all like how I am now. It just sounds so predatory. What was I thinking a decade ago to use that name? Well, at least it's a good thing to know. If you know that, that's a start. Shauna says folks are increasingly using DMT to tap into the deeper state. Danger of obtaining unearned wisdom. I don't know what DMT is, but Dr. Jung certainly warned against unearned wisdom. And Jaguar says, I think we are doing the same with this channel. And, I would say that that's a risk. Okay. In other words, you can't live your life by my life. You have to go out and get your own life. What I can tell you is that it's okay to do that. You can have a life. You can go have an experience and have a real life and make mistakes and so on. And, this is why Dr. Jung said very clearly, I'll see if I can find it quickly, but he said, don't live by other people's examples. I will not be a teacher to you. Let me see if I can find that very quickly. Let's see. He just said, I will not be a teacher to you. It's in the first or second chapter of the Red Book, and I'm now 3 hours into this session, so I'm running out of steam. This being a soliloquy, but get yourself a reader's edition copy of the Red Book. They sell for about $25 here in the U.S. and you'll find it. But he said, I do not live your life by the example of others. You have to live your own life. And so what psychotherapy can do for you, or what watching YouTube videos can do with you, or going to the movies can do for you, is free you to go out and experience things for yourself. Nobody's going to give you an appropriate teaching that will always work in your life. You have to learn what those things are. But we can give you I can give you the freedom to know that others go through this, go through these issues. And so when you do experience these things, you can say, well, I'm not alone anyway. And I'm telling you, you're not alone at all, because we all go through these things. So anyway, but in the end, you have to do it yourself. So Jaguar says, at the end of the day, I don't think there's anything like unearned wisdom. If you have the presence of mind to apply your wisdom, you have earned it. Well, fair enough. Good point. Gunnar says, question regarding building a healthy ego after healthy ego, alter ego access, so that we don't go through cycles of compensation. Be aware of psychological infections. Yes, obviously. We've had a very serious psychological infection in this country with our current president, and that is a psychic epidemic, and we need to wake up from that. And I'm not sure how you're referring to alter ego here, because you were talking about ego and shadow, I think, here. And we have to understand that we have a shadow, certainly. But then the more important axis is the axis between your ego and yourself, as Dr. Jung called it, the God image, the greater personality, the part of yourself that's in charge, the 2 million year old man. He had many names for it, but Joseph Goldstein said it beautifully during one of his meditation talks. Mindfulness is in the service of wisdom. Okay. And these pass on through suggestion. Someone suffering from depression as an ego-identified state will want you to be depressed too. It normalizes them. All right. Yep. If you catch hypomania through suggestion, it is real. Both will disturb your equilibrium. Your alter ego will react accordingly in an effort to stabilize you. He attempts many overcompensations, and even open the door for your other latent or dormant complexes to intrude into your psychological life. Absolutely. I mean, this is what we've seen in current affairs in the United States and in the last 4 years, and we have to be very aware of that and inoculate all of us to that. Now, the question is whether the American collective unconscious has been inoculated sufficiently as yet. We're going to find that out on the 3rd of November. If Donald Trump is reelected, I think we will be in for a very dark time. And the question is, when will we wake up from it? In the case of Adolf Hitler, it took the German people 26 years to wake up. And they didn't wake up until all the crockery was broken. And so the question is whether this taste of what we've had from Donald Trump is an inoculation or an epidemic that's going to get worse, and we don't know how that will work out. I'm hopeful that I have an idea, but dimethyltryptamine, what the pineal gland releases when we have out-of-body experience and at death. Okay, interesting. I don't know anything about that. What role do prophecies have? Seems all this was foretold. Even C.G. Jung saw the ending of civilization. Well, prophecy is about learning from the past, and if we don't learn from the past, we're destined to repeat it. And so people who are prophets can learn from the past. Now, if I were to make a prophecy, I'll make a prophecy that I'll make a couple of prophecies about our election. My prophecy is that Joe Biden will win by a landslide and Donald Trump will lose by a landslide, number one. I'll prophesy that we're going to have more years of dealing with the lost boys that are in these white guy militia groups of people who like to go in the woods and play with guns. And I don't mean hunters. I mean people who think that they can create a militia and take over the northern United States, which is a wet dream par excellence. And so we're going to have some more years of dealing with those people. But as Becca Tarnas told us on the 29th or 30th of April, or August, 30th of August in her talk, we have to enact the world that we want. It's us that's alive right now. And we're not bound by anything that has happened before. We have to enact the world we want. And, that's the lesson of the devil card in the tarot. And in the devil card, you see the man and the woman are chained, but the chains are loose. In other words, you can take the chains off. And that's true of all of us. We can take the chains off anytime. And so the question is, where is the American collective unconscious right now? My prophecy is that it's going to defeat the current president in a landslide, and that's based on lots of history. It's not based on some wooey woo thing, but it's based on knowing history. But my secondary prophecy is that if I'm wrong about that, then things are going to get much, much worse everywhere in the world. And humanity will have many years to get back to equilibrium. That's my concern. And I know that these are concerns in India and in Brazil and in Russia. So Pavel says, are you willing to bet a set of black books on that? Am I willing to bet a set of black books on whether the president will lose in an election, in a landslide, Yeah, sure. Pavel, send me your name and address. And so what will you put up as your counterbalance if you lose? That's the question. It's a bet, right? So both sides have to have something at risk. I'm certainly willing to bet a set of black books that the president will lose in a landslide. Um, but um, but if I'm right, what do you give in return? So write me an email, skip.conover@gmail.com, and offer something of equal value, and you've got yourself a bet. And so Pablo says the American collective unconscious has spread into Europe in the last couple of decades. It's becoming quite similar over here. Yes, I agree with that. And it definitely has spread around the world. We see that in many ways. Um, and and Jaguar says the ending of civilization can occur through AI. Well, it can occur through AI, but it can't occur, unless humanity loses its common sense and causes nuclear warfare, or if we get hit by an asteroid or something like that. But otherwise, life finds a way. This is one of Dr. Jung's points. Life will find a way, and there will be civilization again. And so I'm not worried about that in the long term, but the short term could be pretty ugly. Um, and my point about how things have spread around the world, this is partially a function of the YouTube and of also of the internet, because just I'll give you a very simple example. In 30 years ago, before I started working in India, when we spoke to in English with an Indian, we would hear what we called English, which was English as spoken by an Indian, which was sometimes difficult to understand for an American. But what's happened in the last 30 years is now you listen to young Indians speak English, and they speak like Americans. They don't speak like fake Englishmen. Okay, they used to speak like fake Englishmen, which we called English in Indian English. But today, when we listen to people from India who are younger, who've been grown up since the World Wide Web became available, let's say in the last 25 years, they pretty much sound like an American today. And so, yes, the American culture has spread around the world. When I went to China for the first time, or not the first time, the second time, when I went to Beijing for the first time, I was really surprised to stand on the corner of Tiananmen Square and see on the other corner of Tiananmen Square the golden arches of McDonald's. Okay, so that's how bad it's gotten. That's pretty bad. Let's see. All right. So Pavel, let me know what you're putting up as your side of the bet, and we'll go for it. Now, and Shauna makes a correct comment that we have this Tower of Babel conditions, and I agree with that. All right. Now, I've been talking nonstop for 3 hours, and I have another session this afternoon where I'm not going to talk, but I have to be in another session And I urge you to all join it. I've given you the link. It's the link to the Philemon Foundation. And you should, scroll upward and find the link to the Philemon Foundation's presentation this afternoon by Sonu Shamdasani, who is the editor and translator of both the Red Book and the Black Books. And he's going to talk with us this afternoon about the evolution of the Black Books. And so that will be 3 hours from now at 2 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And so I urge you, if you haven't gotten a ticket for that, it costs $30 to participate. And I'm not sure they have space anymore, but you may find that very interesting. Jaguar says, I grew up watching Star Trek and Baywatch in India. So yes, American culture is all over the world. Yeah, no kidding. All right, peace. I'm going to sign off for now. I'll see you next Sunday. And oh, by the way, we did manage to get through one paragraph of the essay that I was reading from. And so I will continue with that from there next week, to the extent it's interesting to you. And thank you, Vivian, for being with me on Zoom, and to Aline as well. And thank you all. We still have quite a following here on YouTube, so that's why I keep talking. We still have 20 of us here after 3 hours. That's pretty amazing. So thank you all, and